finding all the different ways that we needed to support the business to make it part of the way that we talk and how we line all of those up. And of course, that starts with our executive team and how they line everything that we're doing to our culture, and that we can demonstrate that our culture has got a direct link and serves what we're doing from a strategy and a purpose perspective.
Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of The High Performance Leader. I am genuinely thrilled to welcome this week's guest, Andrea Duncan, who is the GM Culture, Capability and Performance at Kiwi Bank. Andrea is in esteemed company. She's our second guest to have been named in the Human Resources Directors HRD Global 100 for 2023, and we'll hear a little bit more about that later on, I'm sure. For the last couple of years, Andrea has been leading Kiwi Bank's culture shift to position them for the next 20 years. She's also a board member of the Duke of Edinburgh New Zealand chapter and recently got to spend some time with HRH, the Duke of Edinburgh himself. Really fascinating project to be involved in there. A big part of the work that Andrea has been involved in for the last couple of years with Kiwi Bank has been around redefining their culture and the impact that is now having on the organization. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. How are you? And welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be here. We've got a beautiful day here in Wellington, and summer's on its way.
Wonderful. Good to hear. And obviously, for those of us who aren't familiar with Kiwi Bank, Kiwi is probably a bit of an indicator, but give us a bit of an intro to what is Kiwi Bank and how did you end up there?
So Kiwi Bank is our fifth largest bank here in New Zealand and the largest New Zealand owned bank. And so a really key part of supporting Kiwi to be better off. We're a purpose-led organisation, and our purpose is really what drives us in the work that we do, and wanting to make a difference for all Kiwi here in New Zealand. I actually ended up here a little bit by accident, and an opportunity arose to do some project work, which I took on the opportunity to do, and then the role I'm in came up, and I became a permanent part of the business. And so it's been a really exciting few years and something that I've been really loving doing.
Super interesting. And we're going to dive into a lot of these pieces more deeply, but something you said there, we're a purpose-led organization. And that's a term we're hearing quite a lot now in the employment marketplace and in the brand marketplace for differentiating yourself to attract the best talent possible. But can you just share in your own words, what is a purpose-led organization, first of all?
So in terms of what I understand a purpose-led organisation to be, is that we have a really clear understanding of what we're trying to make a difference for and who we're trying to make a difference for. And we've got three key areas that we're really focused on driving change in. And one is about making a difference for Tamariki, for the young people here in New Zealand. And that's really around making financial education accessible to all young people. We want to make a difference for Kiwi as well, and that is in terms of helping to enable them to have financial security, and that is often related to being able to purchase your first home, or making key financial decisions that are going to enable you to have a more stable financial future. And then also for business here in New Zealand, and our focus is around enabling businesses to be supporting their sustainable journey. We're a B Corp certified organisation, so we've really strong focus on sustainability, and we want to enable other businesses to be able to support their own sustainable journeys as well. And so having that really clear sense of purpose that is a key to what we're driving towards really helps, I think, to have a common focus for why people want to work here, and a lot of what brings people to Kiwi Bank and what enables people to stay is having that clear sense of we're making a difference for New Zealand.
I love that idea of getting very clear of what you're doing and who you're there to serve and getting everybody aligned around that concept. And for our listeners outside New Zealand, Kiwi is a vernacular term for New Zealand or New Zealander. So Andrea is using the internal lingo there of the country, but I think it really lays out the importance of getting that clarity and being very focused on the people you're there to serve and the communities and the businesses that you're there to serve. So if we can rewind the clock a little bit and talk about the journey that you have now ended up at, well, probably the 2/3 of the way or the midpoint of the journey. But if we can go back to the beginning, what did that organization look like from a cultural standpoint? And what were the sort of the indicators that you were seeing that some of our listeners may be able to identify in their own organizations as well?
So when I joined Kiwi Bank, I think the culture here, from what I understand, the Kiwi culture, the culture here at Kiwi Bank has generally been pretty good. And when I joined, it was quite early in the days that I joined that we started exploring what we needed. So I think that common focus around being the largest New Zealand-owned bank, and having a sense of that purpose has always been quite strongly there, from what I can understand. When I joined the organisation, we were in at the early stages of a technology transformation, which is a big part of the journey that we're on at the moment. And what drove us to look at, have we got the culture that we need to be successful in the future, was, if we're doing a lot of work around culture, transformational, technology transformational change, what else do we need to be looking at in the terms of the way that we're working? And is the culture that we've got going to serve us in terms of being able to take us forward? And that was really the big driver. So it wasn't that there was any issues with the culture or any problems with the culture that we had here. It was more about going, is what we've got really going to help take us forward? And so what we did was then set about understanding, what do we think we need? And it wasn't about a small group of people or our senior leaders, saying this is what we need. It was actually going, let's go and talk to the organization and hear from as many people as possible about what are the things that if they are really thriving and growing, what's happening for them in the culture as an individual that enables you to show up and do your best work. And then also we were at that stage, so this was back in sort of 2021 time, we were looking at our 2025 strategy, what's happening in the environment that's driving us to deliver on that strategy. So we got people to sort of think and project forward a little bit. So it was really those two questions. And we spoke to over 2,000 people. So we spoke to about 92% of Kiwi Bank. And that was a real investment in having those conversations. And they were either facilitated online or face-to-face. But it was actually, we got a huge amount of data out of those conversations that then enabled us to distill that down into some key themes that helped us to understand, actually, we do need to make a shift in the way that we're talking about our culture and the way that we want to focus and embed our culture that will enable us to be successful in the future. And we were able to build some very clear sort of from-tos to help us start to get into that measurement progress and look at the transition that we're making. So it's really that the drive around, have we got the culture that's going to enable us to be successful in the future?
I really admire the 92% of the organization being talked to. What are some of the variables or the factors or the pieces of culture that you measure to define what the culture is?
Well, actually, we first wanted to make sure that we were measuring culture as opposed to engagement. And I think that's it's an interesting, they're different. And what we were understanding at the time when we talked to a lot of people, because we went and we did quite a lot of research as well. We went and spoke to other organizations. We spoke to other people who had been on culture journeys. And a lot of what people were talking about was actually engagement sort of wrapped up in that sort of culture, this is what culture is. And we were very clear, actually, that we saw culture being quite different. And one of the things that we really focused on at the time was Edgar Schein and his model of culture. And, we felt a real connection to what Edgar Schein defined as culture. And so we were really clear that we saw that whilst culture and engagement are linked, they are quite distinct and different. And so when we went into selecting a tool to help us measure our culture, we were very specific. We wanted to find an organization that could actually tangibly help us to measure culture, not engagement sort of wrapped up in trying to define what culture is. So that was a real, kind of a distinction for us. But for us, it's really around, what are the behaviors, the mindsets, the thinking that goes into help, what drives culture forward and being really clear around those key areas. And so when we look at measuring culture, we've been able to adapt. So we ended up selecting a tool called Glint, which had a very clear model of culture, which is really quite aligned to the thinking that we had around how we define culture. And then we measure all of those key elements as we survey Kiwi Bank regularly. And so it's being, that all of those different types of areas that we're really focusing on measuring.
I like that. So the beliefs, the behaviors, the actions, the words people are using, the way they describe the organization.
Yeah.
And that is, as you say, it's interlinked with engagement.
Yeah.
But it is quite fundamentally separate when we think about, we can't just measure engagement as a measure of culture. We have to look at the two in conjunction with each other.
We do.
What were some of the big surprises that came up of where you were versus where you thought you needed to be as a culture for 2025?
Well, I think one of the big surprises was that the way we described culture previously, so we had 3 values that we had, and they were very, if you understand New Zealand culture, there's a way that Kiwi like to talk about things, and there's a bit of a vernacular around Kiwi lingo. And so the values that we had previously were, they felt authentic to Kiwi Bank at that time and were quite in that Kiwi colloquial sort of vernacular. And for many people, they thought that it felt right, and it did. I mean, it's a bit like when you're used to something, then it does feel right and it does feel like you. What the data told us out of the conversations was that they were fine, but they weren't going to serve us going forward, and we did need to shift that. And I remember having a conversation with our CEO at the time, who said, "Well, we've got a lot of things going on. Changing the way that we're going to talk about our culture is a massive undertaking. And we've got a lot of other things going on. And I don't want to be putting additional pressure on the organisation to change something that we don't think we need to change. And do we actually need to change that?" And I was like, well, our people are saying, yes, we do. Our people are saying that while these values feel like us at the moment, is it just because they've been there for quite a long time? What they're saying is they don't think that these are going to take us forward. And, we had a conversation around, well, can we, take what they're saying and can we almost retrofit it into what we've already got? Like, no, this is, they've told us we want these are the 4 things that we need. We had 3 values at that stage. And actually, and it wasn't values that they were saying that they needed, it was more mindsets. And that's how we now talk about our culture, is in the context of 4 mindsets. And, and if we can enable people to have the mindset of, that they belong, or a mindset around rising to the challenge, that helps us to drive behavior and outcomes and the talk. So we actually moved from, organizational values to describing our culture in the context of mindset. So that was quite, that was probably the big surprise, actually. And, and then the challenge of going, well, we're actually going to make the big decision of shifting the way that we talk about this.
I really like the reframing of values into mindsets, and it's something that echoes a lot of the work we do, where for most people, the values are a poster on the wall, or they're something in the signature in the email block. And very rarely are those internalized, and they don't become an inner belief. And if they don't become an inner belief, they don't actually shift the behaviors and actions of the people. So moving to that mindset model when you're trying to shift a culture, I think is an advantage for helping people to move through an internalization process. Fascinating, really fascinating. Hey there, Jimmy here, and I just wanted to drop into this episode and let you know we're extremely grateful for all of the incredible reviews and feedback that we're getting about the Ways of Working podcast. We've managed to get ourselves amazingly into the top 10% globally of all management podcasts, which is an absolute dream for me to be able to share the Ways of Working message across a wider community. I wanted to share a quick review from one of our listeners because it's absolutely incredible and inspiring to those people that we're trying to reach and communicate with. From Pinnacle Coach, Jimmy is a great natural interviewer, and his background helps him to ask some really good questions. I've enjoyed a couple of the episodes from here and always come away feeling inspired for my AIM work. Pinnacle Coach, thank you so much for that incredible review. We really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform of choice to the Ways of Working podcast. And we'll see you soon. Take care. And of course, we're painting a fairly rosy picture here that, of course, you spoke to 92% of people. They've told you that they want to move from three values to 4 mindsets. And as we all know, everybody wanted to go on the journey, right? It was a really easy move to take everybody along that transition. Or potentially were there some people who were a little bit less keen to go on that journey of shifting a culture?
Yeah. So aside from there was a couple of things, actually. One was, of course, first of all, having the conversation with our CEO around that, the transition from going, we're shifting our values to, now a new way, potentially we're recommending a new way of talking about our culture. And then, of course, having the conversation with our whole of executive team to get their endorsement around what we needed to do. And, when you've got something that is quite deep-seated and is a comfortable way of doing things, and you're recommending something new with something as fundamental as this, it's a really big decision to make. And so we really wanted to be clear that this wasn't our thinking. It wasn't just what we had come up with, that we were representing the views of all, just over 2,000 people that we'd spoken to. And so we had to be really clear about how we demonstrated the process of going from 18,500 individual pieces of data from the conversations, plus all of the anecdotal information, and that we were able to synthesize that into 4 key areas. And then, of course, we had the conversation about, 3 is usually the best number for these sorts of things. And, is 4 going to be too much? And, there's a lot for people to remember. And, how do we keep it simple? Plus, also, we have an interesting scenario here in New Zealand where, we have English and Te Reo Māori as well. And, and as being Kiwi Bank, it's really important that we're representing New Zealand and being representative of Kiwis. So it's that balance as well of the English and Te Reo. And previously we'd had an English version of our values and a Te Reo version of our values, and they meant slightly different things. And so you could use them in slightly different ways. And we wanted to eliminate that and to have one way of talking about our culture. So there's a few interesting, hurdles, I think, that we needed to get through. And so we had to be really clear about how we talked about that journey to demonstrate how we progressed through that process. So that first hurdle was really around helping our CEO and our executive team to really understand that and be comfortable to take on our recommendation. Then in terms of the actual process of rollout, interestingly, we were in that long lockdown in Auckland when we finally released and launched. So it was actually quite hard to get a sense of how other people were feeling, because we were, we in Auckland, I was at home, and so we launched these online. And as I reflect on the last couple of years, I don't remember particular pushback or people saying, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't work for us, this doesn't, and I think mainly because we were reflecting the conversations that we'd had with everybody. And so when people in the organisation have had the opportunity to contribute to how we all want to talk about our culture, then in many ways it's actually quite hard to say, well, I disagree with that, or that doesn't feel like the right thing to do, or it doesn't feel like the way that we want to be talking about our culture. So I think, that's probably a big part of it. What I will say, though, is that it's a lot of effort and hard work to enable people to connect with it, to understand what it means, then to be able to start to make it their own. And so we did the actual hard work, I think, is in the embedding process and getting things in front of people. As you said, we don't want it to be posters on the wall. And we actually do now have some, but we didn't for a long time, again, because we were all, we were in lockdown. But, it's how we bring it into everything that we talk about, and the language, how it becomes the part of the vernacular of the way that we talk about what we're doing, and how we can line everything that we do into these aspects of our culture. So the hard work for us was in terms of finding all the different ways that we needed to support the business to make it part of the way that we talk, and how we line all of those up. And of course that starts with our executive team, and and how they line everything that we're doing to our culture, and that we can demonstrate that our culture has got a direct link and serves what we're doing from a strategy and a purpose perspective. So, coming back to answering your question, very long-winded way of answering your question, is that I don't think we particularly had so much pushback. I think it was more about ensuring that people really could see the connection with where we'd landed. And then we had to really support the business in lots of different ways to enable us to embed it over time.
I really resonate with that, because I think one of the reasons that culture change journeys often fall over is because it's just seen as a process. Boom. And I don't know if you've come across that sport, curling,
yes,
where they throw the stone along the ice, and you've got those people who are feverishly sweeping the ice in front of the stone to make it glide more smoothly.
Yeah.
And I kind of see culture changes like that. You know where the target is, you know where you're releasing the stone from, but all the way you've got to be sweeping the obstacles out the way, and you've got to be smoothing the ice so the culture change can start to glide and flow through. Otherwise you hit friction, you hit resistance, you hit barriers in people. And that can cause some real challenges for the success of the journey, but also the way that people receive the journey, because they then feel like it's being done to them versus that they're part of something, and they're embracing this journey as they go through it.
Yeah.
So I really like that sort of sense that you took, approaching it like a journey. But you will have encountered some people who flat out resisted, right?
No, we didn't.
No.
Okay. No.
Amazing.
And when I was thinking about some of the things that we could talk about here, and I was it's like there is, and then I'm going, am I living in a bubble? Am I, because this, of being so deeply involved in the work, I haven't spoken to anybody who has flat out resisted what we've done with our culture. And I think part of it too is probably that we haven't been too prescriptive about what the culture is. So whilst we have our 4 mindsets, what we call Ngā Kauaka, so whilst we have those 4 and we're clear on what those 4 are, so, it is about a place to belong, rise to the challenge, better together, customer at the heart. And underneath that, we haven't then gone, right, this is what a place to belong looks like. This is what rise to challenge. We have some thoughts and ideas around this is what it is and this is what it isn't. But actually, it's up to you to find, so within your team, what does a place to belong look like? What is rise to the challenge? What does that mean to you in terms of the work that you're doing and the opportunities and the challenges that are ahead of you? And how do you line all of that up with, the direction that we're going? So whilst we are clear on those 4 areas and we have some overarching ways of describing those, it's actually up to each of us as individuals and within the team that we work in, that we go, yeah, how does that work for us? What does that look like? How do I know that I belong? So I think that's, so if you're not being so prescriptive, then there isn't a lot of resistance that people can have, because it's up to them to decide how it works for them. So I wonder if that's partly maybe why we haven't had that sort of flat out resistance to what we've been doing.
No, I admire that approach, and it echoes again some the work that we recommend. I think often as an HR function or as a people and culture function, it can be very tempting to go, well, here's our values, and then here's the behaviors that demonstrate those values, and then here's the capability matrix that sits under those behaviors, and becomes very, very prescriptive. We work on a basis of a model of 4 C's, which is initially, what's the concept that we're trying to get across here? So for you, it would be, better together, for example. Then what's the content that supports that? As you say, some underlying thoughts. And that's where a lot of teams get stuck. And actually the magic, the beauty in the engagement comes from the context and the conversation.
Absolutely.
So the context is, and what does that mean to me? And the conversation is, and how are we going to talk about that together?
Yeah.
And if we can embrace the second 2 C's out of the 4, then actually you get far more traction in a culture change like this than you would if you're just saying, here's the concept and here's the content.
Yeah.
Now you have to go do.
Yeah.
Because again, people aren't internalizing it, which is key.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying there. And I think that is, let individuals, let teams work that out for themselves. And we don't need to be telling people, how it feels to belong, nor should we, be. But, here's some ways that you can have the conversation with your teams, and here's some tools to help you do that. But, that's now, and then you're empowering people to do that, to create this space. And we, all of us collectively, create the culture here. So each of us need to, understand the role that we're playing.
I love that. I'm so intrigued and fascinated by the journey that you're going on. We're moving into the last piece of the podcast, and I wanted to. You mentioned obviously Edgar Schein's work and the beauty of the model and the framework that he created. But I was wondering if there's a couple of resources that you'd recommend to our listeners to really get stuck into, to give them a better understanding of culture change work. What would you be going and recommending?
Well, actually, I was thinking about that. I actually think from in the culture space, there's a lot of information out there, and with everything that we do in the work that we do, there's actually there's so much on the internet when you're Googling things around culture change. So I actually think, though, the best thing that you can be doing is reaching out to your network and having conversations with people about what they're doing, because I think what's important with work in the culture space is actually, how applicable is this stuff? There's a lot of theory out there. And the Edgar Schein theory for us was a really great driver. And actually, there's the HBR model of culture, which has about 7. I think, I can't remember exactly. It's about 7 that we actually use just to baseline our original where we were at. But then we use the Edgar Schein work to help take us forward and help us to focus on how we wanted to progress. But the best learnings that we had was reaching out to our network and talking to people about what they've done, what they've been successful, where the theory has and hasn't worked, what's practically, what is practical. And so I think, there's so much in culture space around learning from experience, that actually just getting out and talking to people, finding people that you see are doing a great work in that space, connect with them, talk to them about how they've done it, what their learnings have been, where things haven't worked, what they would do differently next time. And so I think the best thing that you can be doing is actually talking to others around practical experience.
Fantastic. And that's actually how you and I connected, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I admired your work in the culture space. And I'm always fascinated to nerd out as somebody who knows about culture. Wonderful. Andrea, thank you so much for your time today. If you were to give our audience just a key takeaway or something that they should really be paying attention to from what we've discussed today, what would it be?
So I think, when you're doing anything with work in the culture space, you can't shortcut involving all your people in some way, or as many of your people as possible in some way. Having everybody involved in that culture journey is significant and is the key to success. And so I think involving all of your people to help you define and shape your culture and do it in a really inclusive way, I think is how we've been able to be successful so far, and how I hope we continue to be successful, because it's obviously an ongoing journey and we're all still learning. It's not to say that we've landed or whatever. We're still learning about how we can continue to evolve and improve the work we're doing, but you just can't shortcut including as many people as possible in the dialogue and helping everyone to shape that.
Andrea Duncan, I am so thrilled by this conversation, and I know our listeners are going to absolutely love some of the knowledge bombs or wisdom nuggets that you've shared with us. Thank you so much for taking the time out to spend with us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Speak soon.
Thanks.